Treasurer, thanks for coming in.
Nice to be with you.
When a welfare recipient gets their income forecast wrong, they have to repay the government. When big companies got their income forecasts wrong, the government let them keep billions. Why the double standard?
Well, actually, both the ATO and Services Australia pursue payments that are not in accordance with the law. In the case of the ATO and JobKeeper, around $200 million has been recouped. In the case of Services Australia, it's a fundamental principle of our welfare system that somebody who receives welfare has to disclose their other assessable income, in this case, JobKeeper. Now, when it comes to the broader issue of people's or businesses' turnover decline being above or below 30%, the program was set up based on an anticipated decline in turnover. If we didn't do that, if we'd gone for a percentage of a person's income or we'd gone for an actual decline in turnover, we wouldn't have got the money out the door. And it turned out that JobKeeper was a very successful program that was well targeted and that actually delivered the strong economic recovery.
Okay, but to go to your points that you were making, why didn't you include a clawback feature in the original JobKeeper plan?
Because if businesses had to show an actual turnover decline, then we wouldn't have got the money out the door.
No, but it would work the same as welfare. You would have looked at it later.
It's a very different approach. You've got to go back to what we confronted.
How's it a different approach? It's exactly the same thing.
Because in both cases, we pursue people who break the law. But if you go back, Leigh, to what we encountered in March of last year when we introduced JobKeeper, we were staring into the economic abyss. Treasury said that the unemployment rate could reach as high as 15%, that the economy could contract by at least 20% in the June quarter. This was economic Armageddon. In response, we put in place JobKeeper. It was supported by the Labor Party at the time. 3.8 million people received it, and the Governor of the Reserve Bank said it was a remarkable program. And in a Treasury review, they found that it was well targeted. And a very important data point there is that the average decline in turnover of businesses that received JobKeeper in that first quarter was 37% in April, whereas the turnover decline in businesses that didn't receive JobKeeper was just 4%. That shows it was well targeted.
But you point out the economic benefits of JobKeeper that nobody disputes, the jobs saved and all of the rest of it. But those jobs weren't saved in companies that increased their turnover, though. Those companies didn't need help saving jobs. They were making money hand over fist to pay their staff.
Well, I put it to you that a lot of businesses were doing it tough then, and if you had
not the ones that got increased turnover.
In many circumstances, the businesses that received JobKeeper desperately needed it, and without it, we wouldn't have seen the strong economic recovery. The unemployment rate today is at 4.6%. And we have seen again in the national accounts today, the economy show its remarkable resilience. A big part of that recovery has been the success of JobKeeper.
But it brings me back to the original point, which is why didn't you include a clawback provision in the original plan? Because you could have foreseen that companies were having to estimate what they thought their turnover would be, that there were going to be some companies that wouldn't have a downturn. Why wasn't there a clawback provision like there are, as you point out, for individual welfare recipients?
Well, if you go back to the mindset of businesses back then, when there was thousands of people lining up outside Centrelink, if they were going to have to pay back that money, then they wouldn't have necessarily taken it in the first place, and you would have seen jobs being lost.
No, but who doesn't pay back money if they don't need it? If I asked you for $20 and then I didn't need it, I'd pay it back to you.
Well, I'll put it to you that the businesses that received JobKeeper were in the face of one of the biggest economic crises that this country has ever seen. Immediately, once JobKeeper was put in place, confidence boosted, both business confidence and consumer confidence. Workers knew that they could hold on to their jobs, employees kept them on, and actually the recovery in the turnover of the businesses that you're talking about was actually helped by the fact that they kept their staff on through JobKeeper. We had a review undertaken by Treasury. I made it public last July. It recommended that we keep that anticipated decline for those first 2 quarters. As you know, the program went for 12 months, and for the second 6 months of that program, we had a tapered rate and it was based on an actual decline in turnover.
You mentioned national accounts, which came out today. Your budget relies on annual growth of 4.25% to meet targets, so that's at least 1% a quarter. The June quarter's 0.7%, so it's tracking under that. the September quarter, which is going to take in lockdowns in your two biggest states, will obviously be bad. Come early next year, the economy is not going to be in anywhere near the shape that you hoped that it would be in, is it?
Well, I'd actually challenge that, the premise of your question, because actually what we saw in the June quarter today was both nominal GDP and real GDP better than what we had forecast in the May budget. And when you look at the labour market, we now have unemployment under 5% at 4.6%, the lowest in 12 years. We weren't forecasting an unemployment rate that low to at least the end of this year or even into next year. So the economy today has shown its resilience. What was particularly pleasing is that housing investment is up off the back of programs like Home Builder. Machinery and equipment is up by more than 20% since the October budget last year off the back of our immediate expanded instant asset write-off provisions, and consumption bounced back as restrictions eased. Travel, tourism, cafes, restaurants. It shows what the economy can do, Leigh, when restrictions are eased.
There was a significant reversal today from the Victorian Premier who abandoned COVID zero, joining New South Wales in the transition to living with COVID. How are you going to manage a two-tier economy if you have Victoria and New South Wales opening up substantially at 70 to 80%, while the other states, in particular Western Australia and Queensland, stick to their lockdown mentality?
Well, that is why all states and territories, whether they're Queensland, Western Australia or the southern states, need to stick to the plan that was agreed at National Cabinet.
But they're not showing signs of that, and how are you going to manage that if they don't?
Well, again, we're hoping to get the vaccination rates up in those particular states because they're well behind where New South Wales and Victoria are. But there's an economic imperative for those states to open up as one country. We're hearing in Western Australia about labour force shortages in their booming construction and resources sector. In Queensland, the tourism businesses, Gold Coast, the Sunshine Coast, Cairns are doing it really tough. They rely on open borders. What is really pleasing, though, is to hear those words from Daniel Andrews today. It's an acknowledgement that zero COVID, which you and I have discussed previously, is a fallacy, that you can't eliminate the virus. You need to learn to live with it. And stringent lockdowns need to come to an end as soon as it's COVID safe to do so.
Treasurer, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Hi, I'm Leigh Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 7:30's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.